Majin Trunks, Episode 3. Majin Trunks takes off Android 17's face. So let's get to it. The air was thick with tension as Majin Trunks walked slowly towards his enemies in the ruined city, his golden aura glowing with an unnatural intensity, cracking with black lightning. His eyes, once filled with determination and hope, now burned with a cold malice. The androids, 17 and 18, stood side by side, their usual cocky demeanors replaced by a rare sense of unease. They had faced Super Saiyans before, like Gohan and Vegeta, in their previous encounters, but this was something different, something entirely different. Trunks' transformation wasn't just a boost in power, it was a complete shift to his aura. The dark energy that radiated from him was palpable. It was a suffocating presence that seemed to warp the very air that was around him. His grin was predatory, his gaze locked onto the androids like a hunter sizing up its prey. The androids, for the first time in their existence, felt the slight flicker of fear, and it seemed to be growing within them. This wasn't the same Trunks they had fought before. This was someone far more dangerous. Android 17 clenched his fist, his usual smirk absent. What the hell happened to this kid? He muttered, his voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. Android 18 stood beside him, narrowing her eyes. He's different, 17. This energy he's giving off doesn't seem natural. Trunks tilted his head, his grin widening. You're right, he said, his voice low and dripping with venom. I'm beyond a Super Saiyan's power. This is something you'll never understand, something you'll never be able to match. He raised his hand, black energy crackling around his fingertips. You took everything from me, my world, my father, and my future. So it's only right that I unplug you dolls. The androids exchanged a glance, their confidence wavered. They had always been the predators, the ones who instilled fear in others. But now the roles were reversed. Trunks was no longer the hopeful warrior fighting for justice. He was a force of destruction, fueled by hatred and dark magic. And he was looking at them like they were wounded gazelles on an African savanna. Android 17's voice was uncharacteristically serious as he spoke to his sister. 18, we need to be careful. This kid, he's not playing around anymore. He was strong before he transformed, so we can't underestimate him now. Android 18 nodded, her usual nonchalance replaced by a rare sense of caution. I know, she said, her eyes never leaving Trunks. But we faced worse, right? We just need to... And then it cut her off. Before she could finish her sentence, Trunks moved. It was so fast that even the androids with their enhanced reflexes barely registered it. Trunks was hovering in the air, his dark aura crackling around him right in front of Android 18, with his hand tightly wrapped around her throat. Android 18's eyes widened in shock as she felt the pressure under her neck. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Trunks' grip was like a vice, his strength beyond anyone she had faced before. She swung her arms recklessly, trying to break free, but it was no use. Trunks' grip was like a vice, his strength beyond anything she experienced. Android 17 lunged to save his sister, saying, "Let her go," he shouted. But Trunks simply raised his hand. A blast of dark energy forced 17 to skid to a halt. The ground beneath them cracked under the force of the energy, and 17 was forced to shield his face from the debris. Trunks turned his attention back to Android 18, his grin never faltering. "Since you wanted to get in the way of my battle last time," he said, his voice playfully menacing, "I'll turn your TV off first." Android 18 struggled against Trunks' grip, her fist pounding against his arm with all her strength. But it was no use. Trunks' new power was on a completely different level now, and his grip was ironclad. Her vision began to blur as the pressure around her neck increased, and for the first time in her existence, she was experiencing actual fear. Trunks' grin was widening as he watched her struggle, his eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. "You androids always thought you were untouchable," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "But look at you now, gasping for air like a fish out of water." Android 17 was desperate to save his sister, so he charged at Trunks again. This time his hands glowed with energy. "Let her go, you freak," he shouted. The sound of the energy blast echoed through the ruined city as Trunks was struck square in the back. The force of the attack sent him slightly stumbling forward. His grip on Android 18 loosened and she fell to the ground. Gasping for air, she clutched her throat. Trunks slowly turned, his golden hair flickering with black lightning as it surrounded his body. His eyes narrowed as he locked on Android 17. The android stood a few feet away, his hands still glowing with residual energy, his expression a mix of rage and frustration. You think you can waltz in here and become our executioner? Android 17 spat, his voice filled with anger. You're just a kid with a cheap power-up. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies. Trunks smirked, brushing off the attack as if it was nothing. Oh, I don't? He said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I seem to recall you two deciding the fate of millions for years, without a second thought. Or did you forget about all the cities you've destroyed, all the lives you've ended? Android 17's fist clenched, his jaw tightened as he glared at Trunks. We're not the same as you, he shot back. We don't pretend to be the heroes. We do what we want, and we don't apologize for it. Android 18 stumbled back, her hand pressed against her throat as she struggled to regain her composure. Her usual smug expression was gone and was replaced by a look of genuine anguish. She glared at Trunks, her eyes burning with hatred, but she said nothing for once. The usual talkative android was at a loss for words. Trunks, meanwhile, turned his attention back to Android 17, his grin never faltering. So, he said, his voice dripping with mockery, the bitch bot's brother wants to play hero all of a sudden. Well, let me remind you of something. Both of you are far from the heroes of this story. Android 17's eyes narrowed, his fists tightened. You talk too much, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. You think just because you got a new power-up you can lecture us? Trunks laughed, the sound cold and devoid of any real humor. Absolutely. You two have been a plague to this world for far too long. You've taken everything from many people. And now I'm going to send you both to the junkyard where you belong. Android 18 finally found her voice, her tone sharp and biting. You're just a kid on some type of steroid. She spat. You don't have what it takes to beat us. Trunks grinned. Even more so. We'll see about that, he said, his voice low and filled with promise. But just so you know, there won't be a happy ending for you murder twins. And with that, Trunks vanished. And before Android 17 could react, Trunks was gone. One moment he was standing in front of him, taunting him with a grin. The next he had vanished, leaving nothing but a faint afterimage in his wake. Android 17 barely had time to register what was happening before he felt a sharp pain in the back of his legs. Trunks had reappeared behind him, sweeping his leg out from under him with a swift, powerful kick. Android 17 hit the ground hard, the impact sending a shockwave through the ruined street. Before he could recover, Trunks was already in the air, his foot coming down like a hammer. The stomp landed squarely on Android 17's chest, the force of the blow driving him deeper into the ground as concrete cracked and splintered beneath them. Rubble and debris flew into the air as the ground gave way to the force. Android 17's eyes widened in shock and pain as blood spilled from his mouth. He tried to speak, but the words were caught in his throat. For the first time in his existence, he was being outmatched in strength. This wasn't the same Trunks that had fought previously. This was a demon. Trunks raised his foot again, preparing to deliver another devastating blow, and Android 17's mind raced, searching for a way to escape from the upcoming damage. Meanwhile, deep within the bowels of Babidi's ship, the sorcerer and his demonic servant watched the battle unfold through the glowing crystal ball. Babidi's eyes gleamed in delight as he observed Trunks' relentless assault on the androids. The young Saiyan's transformation into a Majin-infused Super Saiyan had exceeded even Babidi's expectations. The raw power, the unbridled rage, the sheer brutality, it was everything Babidi had hoped for and more. Look at him, dabura, Babidi cackled, his voice high-pitched and gleeful. He's magnificent. The way he toys with them, the way he crushes them under his feet. It's almost poetic. The sorcerer rubbed his hands together, his grin widening as he watched Trunks stomp Android 17 into the ground. This is exactly what I needed. A new warrior fueled by hatred, driven by vengeance. It's perfect. Dabura stood silently beside his master, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. The Demon King had seen many warriors in his time, but Trunks was seeming to be someone different. There was a darkness within him that went beyond mere anger, a darkness that Dabura recognized all too well. He's strong, Dabura admitted, his voice low and measured. But his blind hatred is giving him tunnel vision, and if he's not careful, it could cost him the victory in the long run. Bobbity waved a dismissive hand, his grin never faltering. Nonsense. His hatred is what makes him strong. It's what makes him useful. And look, he pointed to the crystal ball where a faint pulsing energy could be seen radiating from Trunks' body. His power is feeding the cocoon. Majin Buu is being fed from this battle. Thanks to him. Dabura's eyes narrowed as he observed the energy flowing from Trunks to the cocoon. The Demon King had his doubts about Bobity's plan, but knew better than to voice them. Instead, he simply nodded. As you say, Master. But we should keep a close eye on him. He could be unpredictable. Bobbity chuckled, his grin turning sinister. Oh, I'm counting on it. The more unpredictable he is, the more chaos he'll cause. And chaos is exactly what we need. Then we jump back to Trunks about to stomp on 17. Trunks is ready to deliver his crushing blow to Android 17 with his boots when a sudden barrage of energy blast struck him from behind. The force of the attack sent him stumbling forward, his feet slamming into the ground just inches from 17's head. Trunks turned, his golden hair flickering in the wind, his eyes narrowing as he looked onto Android 18. The blonde android stood a few feet away, her hand still glowing from the energy blast she had just fired. Her expression was a mix of defiance and desperation as she glared daggers at Trunks. Get away from him, you freak, she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Trunks smirked, brushing off the attack as if it was nothing. Oh, so the bitch boss sister is putting on the hero cape now, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. How cute. With it once again displaying Trunks' new personality, being far more dark and disrespectful. No longer the kind boy that he was. Android 18 didn't respond. Instead, she fired another volley of infinity bullets. The energy blast streaking through the air toward Trunks. He raised his hand, deflecting the blast with ease, but the distraction gave Android 17 enough time to scramble to his feet and retreat to his sister's side. You okay? Android 18 asked, her eyes never leaving Trunks. Android 17 wiped the blood from his mouth, his expression grim. Yeah, but this kid's not playing around anymore. We need to be careful. Trunks chuckled darkly. Careful won't make a difference for you bots. As Trunks prepared to launch another attack, Android 18 leaned in close to her brother. This isn't working, she said. He's too strong. We need to get out of here. Android 17 nodded, his expression grim. Agreed, but we can't just run. We need to buy ourselves some time. Before Trunks could close the distance, the twins acted in unison. They fired a powerful energy blast at the ground. The explosion kicked up a massive cloud of dust and debris. The thick cloud enveloped Trunks, temporarily blinding him and obscuring his vision. Now's the time, Android 17 shouted, and the twins took off, their movement swift and precise as they darted into the maze of the ruined buildings that surrounded them. The dust cloud gave them just enough cover to disappear from Trunks' sight, but they didn't know if it would last long. When the dust finally settled, Trunks stood alone in the middle of the street, his eyes scanning the area, his senses on high alert, but the androids were nowhere to be seen. Running away, Trunks said, his voice low and filled with disdain. How pathetic. But it doesn't matter. You can't hide from me. With that, Trunks took off, his movement swift and silent as he began his hunt. The ruined buildings loomed around him, their shadowed windows and crumbling walls providing countless hiding places for the twins. But Trunks wasn't worried. If they ever took to the skies trying to flee out of the buildings, he would see them because he would be hovering in the air, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he found them. The androids moved swiftly through the labyrinth of ruined buildings, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The structures around them were a grim reminder of their past actions. Shattered windows, crumbling walls, piles of debris littered the area. These were the same buildings they had destroyed during their reign of terror, the same streets where they had once laughed as they reduced entire cities to rubble. Now those ruins were the only refuge from the relentless pursuit of the new Majin Trunks. Android 17 glanced over his shoulder, his expression tense. We need to find a way out of here, he muttered, his voice low and urgent. That kid's not going to stop until he finds us. Android 18 nodded, her usual confidence replaced by a rare sense of unease. We can't fight him head on, 17. Not like this. He's too strong. We need to buy ourselves some time to figure out a plan. The twins moved deeper into the ruins, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of an escape route. But the buildings themselves were like a maze. The once familiar layout was now a chaotic jumble of destruction. Every corner they turned, even hallway they entered, Every hallway they entered seemed to lead them further into the heart of the ruins. As they navigated the catacombs, Android 17 couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. These ruins were a testament to their past actions, a reminder of the countless lives they had destroyed, and now those same ruins were their prison, trapping them in a nightmare of their own making. "We need to keep moving," Android 18 said, her voice breaking the silence and breaking him out of his trance. "He's not going to stop until he finds us." 17 nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, but where do we go? This place is a damn death trap." Android 18 didn't respond. She didn't have an answer. All she knew was that they needed to keep moving, stay one up ahead of Trunks. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that their time was slowly running out. The androids turned the corner and froze. Standing before them were a group of humans, men and women and children, huddling together in the shadows of the ruined building. Their faces were pale with fear, eyes wide with terror as they stared at the twins. These were some of the stragglers, the ones who had managed to survive Android 18's twisted game of Cage the Rats. They had hidden in the ruins, hoping to escape the androids' notice, but now their worst nightmare had come true. The humans screamed, their voices echoing through the ruins as they backed away from the androids. "Please don't kill us," one of them begged, his voice trembling with fear. "We don't want any trouble." Android 17's expression darkened as he stared at the humans. He had forgotten about them, too focused on escaping Trunks to remember the game he had been playing earlier. But now their presence was a stark reminder of his actions, a reminder of the lives that they had destroyed without second thought. And now the voices of the survivors were about to be their undoing. Android 18 glanced at her brother. "We don't have time for this. We need to keep moving." But before they could react, the screams from the humans reached the ears of Trunks, and the sound was like a beacon cutting through the silence of the ruins and drawing him straight to their location. The scream of the humans sent a piercing chill down the spine of the androids. Because before they could react, the wall behind them exploded in a shower of debris as Majin Trunks burst through like a missile, his golden hair glowing with unnatural intensity. His eyes locked onto the twins, and he put on a wicked smile as he glared at the two with raised hands. "Found you," he said, his voice low and menacing. The humans screamed again, scrambling to get out of the way as Trunks unleashed a massive energy blast. The explosion lit up the dark building. The force of the blast sent the androids flying through the air back onto the street. They crashed through the walls of the building, landing in a heap on the street outside. Trunks stepped through the hole he had created, his aura crackling with dark energy. As he approached the twins, "You thought you could hide from me," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You thought you could run. Pathetic." Android 17 groaned as he struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact, as he had took the brunt of the blast. Android 18 was already standing, her expression grim as she faced Trunks. The twins exchanged a glance. Their usual confidence was replaced by fear for how serious the situation was, because they were trapped and they knew it. The androids stood side by side, their eyes locked on Trunks as he approached. The young Saiyan's aura was overwhelming, his power radiating like a storm. Android 18 clenched her fists, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out. But before she could speak, Android 17 stepped in front of her, his back to her as he faced Trunks. "Go," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Get out of here while you still can." Android 18's eyes widened and shot. "What? I'm not leaving you." Android 17 never looked back. "You have to," he said, his voice firm. "This kid's not going to stop until he kills both of us. If you stay here, you're dead. But if you run, you might have a chance." Android 18 stared at her brother, her heart pounded in her chest very rapidly. She wanted to argue with him, to tell him that they could fight together, that they could find a way to win. But deep down, she knew he was right. Staying there was suicide. 17, she began, her voice trembling. "Go," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Now." Android 18 hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with tears. Then with a final glance at her brother, she turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed in the distance as she went back into the buildings. Trunks watched her go, his grin never faltering. "How touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it don't matter. She won't get far." Android 17 clenched his fist, his eyes burning with determination. "You have to go through me first," he said, his voice low and filled with defiance. Trunks chuckled darkly. "Gladly, but you just used a poor choice of words." The air seemed to freeze as Trunks moved. One moment he was standing a few feet away, the next he was a blur of motion, with his arms shooting forward like a spear. Android 17 barely had time to react before Trunks' hand pierced through his stomach. The force of the blow lifted him up slightly off the ground. The sound of metal tearing and fluid spilling filled the air as Trunks' arm went straight through the android's midsection. The android's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening in a silent scream as he looked down at the gaping hole that was now in his stomach. His hands trembled as he reached for Trunks' arm, but he was too weak to do anything more than clutch at it feebly, overwhelmed by what was occurring. Android 17 coughed, his body convulsing as he began to shut down. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All he could do was stare at Trunks, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and shock. Android 17's vision blurred as he looked down at the gaping hole in his stomach. Blood, oil, and whatever else kept his mechanical body running was spilling out profusely, very rapidly, coating Trunks' arm in a slick metallic sheen. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a searing white-hot agony that seemed to consume him from the inside out. He looked up to the eyes of Trunks' face. The young Saiyan's grin was wider than ever. "You're not so tough now, are you?" Trunks said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Where's all that confidence? All that arrogance?" Before Android 17 could respond, Trunks twisted his arm, the motion sending a fresh wave of pain through the android's body. Android 17 screamed, his voice echoing through the fallen city as his body convulsed. His hands clutched at Trunks' arm, but he was too weak to do anything more than hold on in that moment. Trunks chuckled darkly. "This is what you deserved," he said, his voice slow and filled with malice. But despite the pain and knowledge that he was dying, Android 17 managed to smile. It was a weak, tremulous smile, but it was there nonetheless. He looked Trunks in the eyes, his gaze filled with a strange mix of defiance and acceptance. "You think you've won," he said, his voice steady. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." And then Trunks' smile turned into a frown. "You're trying to kill us both." Trunks struggled against Android 17's grip as he tried to break free, but the android's hold was like a vice, his fingers digging into Trunks' shoulder with a strength that belied his injuries. Trunks' eyes narrowed as he realized that Android 17 wasn't going to let go, not without a fight. With a roar of frustration, Trunks slammed his forehead into Android 17's face. The impact was brutal, the force of the blow ripping off part of the android's face and revealed the mechanical parts that were underneath. Sparks flew as the damaged circuit sparkled and hissed, but Android 17's grip never loosened. "You're not getting away that easy," Android 17 said, his voice weak but filled with determination. "If I'm going to hell, you're coming with me." Trunks growled, his frustration mounting as he realized that Android 17 wasn't going to let him go. The android's body was glowing brighter, the light growing more intense each passing second. "Let go of me." But Android 17 didn't respond. He just kept tightening his grip as his body grew brighter and brighter, trying to take Trunks with him to the grave. Trunks' heart raced as he struggled against the android's iron grip. The android's body was glowing brighter by the second, energy building to a catastrophic level. Trunks knew he was in a precarious situation. If Android 17 self-destruct sequence completed, the explosion could possibly obliterate them both. Even with his newfound power, Trunks wasn't sure he could survive a blast of that magnitude at point-blank range. His mind raced, searching for a way to break free, but Android 17's grip wasn't relenting. His determination was unwavering because he knew that he was going to die anyway from his injury. But just as the glow around Android 17's body was about to reach its peak, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Special beam cannon." The shout was familiar, filled with urgency and power. Trunks barely had time to register what was happening before a brilliant yellow spiral beam streaked through the air and pierced through the skull of the already damaged face of Android 17. The beam struck with surgical precision, tearing through the android's mechanical tissue and disrupting the self-destruct sequence. The glow around Android 17 flickered and died. His body went limp and the energy dissipated. The grip on Trunks slackened, and the lifeless shell of the android crumpled to the ground, his systems fully shut down. Trunks stumbled back, his chest heaving as he turned to face the source of the attack. There, hovering in the air with one arm outstretched, was Gohan. His face was pale, his body still bandaged from his injuries, but his eyes burned with determination. The sight of his mentor alive, awake, and fighting filled Trunks with a mix of relief and gratitude. Gohan had saved him, but at what cost? Trunks could see the strain on Gohan's face, the way his body trembled slightly from the effort of using such a powerful technique in his now weakened state with his one good arm. Well, really, with his only arm. Gohan, Trunks said, his voice low and filled with a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. He hadn't expected his mentor to wake up, let alone come to his aid and see him like this. But here he was, standing tall despite his energies, ready to fight like a true warrior. The lifeless body of Android 17 hit the ground with a dull thud, his once proud form now nothing more than a broken shell of parts on the street. Trunks stepped back, his golden hair flickered as he turned to face Gohan. A grin spread across his face, but it wasn't the warm, relieved smile Gohan might have expected. It was dark, more sinister, filled with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "Thanks for the save, Gohan," Trunks said, his voice low and dripping with a strange mix of gratitude and malice. "I was just about to handle him, but I guess you couldn't resist jumping in," he chuckled. But Gohan could see that something was different and off about his student, as he saw the M that was ingrained on his forehead. And that's where we're going to end on this, man. Hope you guys liked it. Let me know what you guys thought of the artwork. Once again, I told you I'm keeping a white background because it just makes things easier, man. I can get these videos out quicker with the white backgrounds. I ain't got to have too much, add the building space and things like that. All right, so anyways, peace.